This video looks at the slice of PTSD, Asperger's, and problem solving, getting into other people's business, and also fixation or obsession. And the introduction to this particular slice is this toilet. So I'm at the Manila Hotel, and the broader context for this is that PTSD, or basically people with broad spectrum emotional overwhelm, will focus in on very specific thoughts and follow a lineal thread, or an erratic thread, but a very focused corridor of thought and attention as a way of coping with emotional broad spectrum pain, overwhelm, etc. So what this looks like is, in my way of doing that, is I'm busy writing and editing. I need to go to the toilet, so I pause that thread. I come over here, use the toilet, go back to my writing. If any interruption happens in this period, I'm quite frustrated. And then I hear for the second time the toilet is running constantly. And I know the problem because I fixed it last night by joggling the handle. This is where my mind goes. First, I think not everyone will pay attention and hear the constant running of the water. Of those that do, very few will, well, let's say 50% will know how to solve it. And of anyone, only about 20% will report it. So I do a quick calculation, and I think there's going to be thousands of gallons being lost of purified water. I cross-reference that to numerous postings about water shortages, and this becomes my new focus, that nothing is going to happen until this gets resolved. So I've called the duty manager. But then I know duty managers are often clueless at kind of organizing different things at hotels. They may even take the attitude of, what's the big deal? They often try and solve individual guest problems. They love to just move you from room to room. And as long as you're happy, they feel like the problem is solved. So, but engineering, if I call an engineer, they often don't have the support and authority or the confidence in Asian cultures to go to their supervisor and say, all of these models of toilets have this issue, this is the solution. We are wasting, given that this model is used in 40% of our rooms, and there's 200 rooms, i.e. 80 toilets are indefinitely running with about, in my case, it's about 40% of the time, but in other toilets, let's say an average of 10%. So that's 8 toilets endlessly running in a context of water shortage that costs the hotel this, etc. This should be fixed for ecological cost and other methods. So this has entered my stream of narrow focus. Something has to be done about it. So I call the duty manager, ask for a call back. I'm going to ask her to come with an engineer. Meanwhile, I've tested how to fix the toilet. Basically, it gets stuck up in this one position, which happens. It's just a statistical amount of flushes that this will happen, and there's not quite enough weight to knock it down. So how do you solve that? Well, given the mechanism of the toilet, etc., it needs probably about 4 grams of weight. Could be more, could be 10 or 20 grams, but it needs just that little bit of weight to pull the handle down so that it's not stuck up. Now, here's the downside. This is now part of my flow. And nothing else exists outside of this flow. So for me, my reality has ground to a halt while the receptionist hunts for the duty manager. It will stay ground to a halt while the duty manager finds the engineer and comes up here. And during that whole period, I feel uneasy. Now, if I were in my own house, I would have responded to all of this instantly. I have the tools on hand, and this would be fixed and done in less than 4 minutes. And on a purely technical basis, you could say it's not logical for me to get revved up about this for 15 minutes to help the hotel save money. But I'm hooked. I'm hooked with a couple of different hooks. One is the business owner in me is saying I would want someone to help with this if it were my business, because this is costing this amount of money and hassle. It's good for the hotel. 2, I've set it in motion. Now I want to finish it. 3, it's in my narrow focus and I don't want to widen it. 4, I don't want to start something else and then be interrupted and again lose my narrow focus. And so there's enough of me that believes in it, and that need to stay on one thing at a time and stay in this narrow focus in order to manage the emotions is pushing me down this corridor. However, I've also entered a dynamic or a terrain of, quote, codependency. I am, having chosen this as my focus, I'm now in a codependent relationship where if the hotel doesn't respond in a way that shows a correlating, like this is now my whole existence, is this toilet, that doesn't correlate with that amount of priority, then I'm left feeling this imbalance of priority, of consideration, and a certain amount of helplessness. And I think the reason I'm making this video is that unless we understand the design of thought through the emotional and mental lens of individuals that we as a culture, we don't understand this. You understand it a little bit more through these talks if you don't have this experience. It's relatively new for me to understand, and I think that it's important to understand so as to learn and show respect. Relationships get destroyed over very different internal realities and a lack of respect for intense emotions that intersect with those different perceptions. What I mean by this is the hotel manager or the duty manager not having any idea of the framework around which I've made the call may suggest, could I stop by after lunch? Which my mind will logically say, what's the big deal? If I'm not here, then it's not my problem. If I'm here and I'm busy, I can just say that. But I'm also going to think, what if I'm making love with my partner? What if I'm busy writing and I don't want to pick up the phone? And so I don't want to be bothered. I can't track because I'm in this narrow focus. I have no idea a few hours from now where this narrow focus is going to lead, because it just led to this unexpected bypass when I thought I would be writing this whole time. And this is the way I go through life a lot of the time. And because it's natural for me, I've adapted my entire life to support this, i.e., I have 6 months of money in the bank. I'll make $20,000 in a month and then take $10,000 and go traveling for a month, and then work a month and then go traveling for a month. And my total cost, which is rather exorbitant, because what I'm really paying for and subsidizing is PTSD, i.e., Dane without PTSD would love to have housemates. Dane with PTSD can't deal with it, so I bought a whole house for myself. Very expensive, and at times lonely. Dane without PTSD would love to have a wide range of kind of flowing friends. Dane with PTSD can't follow the narrow threads and have this chaos. And so people entering my life have to understand and fit into this thread, and most people don't want to or can't. And so PTSD Dane does not have many friends. Not PTSD Dane doesn't need to stay at a 5-star hotel. PTSD Dane says that's my best chance of relative noise control, prompt service, and people not punishing me for all my nitpickiness. So I've got to earn triple the income, or I start getting all worked up about all the people that are reacting. At 2-star hotels, they don't like picky customers. They're not getting paid enough. And so there's just so much that I've had to do, i.e., terrified of being on the street or being humiliated. I knew I had to be rich in order to feel okay with the way my mind and emotions were working. So becoming rich becomes desperate. Like, I have got to do that, because being poor with this condition is hell. It's obvious. My mind can see that. I look at the way people are treated on the street. I look at the way people without money are flipped off. Like, people like me are eccentric or brilliant or whatever when they're rich, and they're losers when they're not. It's terrible for someone who's suffering this much, with so much trauma, to be getting the constant message, you don't matter. And we give that message to people on the street all the time. So it becomes this big panic not to be there. So there's like 80% of my whole life, from choosing not to do any routine work, being self-employed, figuring out how to make lots of money, buying huge amounts of redundancy so that PTSD isn't triggered. Like, I was explaining to a girlfriend, and I'm just waiting for Genevieve, and so you're now my track, just to clue you into why this is segueing and going along. You're now my track of what I'm doing while I'm waiting. And this is really vulnerable, like 6 to 8 out of 10 vulnerable, because I don't have something really solid to hold on to. And what's waiting for me out there is dread, depression, terror, uncertainty, moving panics and fears that I have no control over. What's in here is stuff I have control over. Narrow beam focus, and that part of the brain. If you're a typical American, about a third of you, well, there's a 30% chance that you're going to be laughing about this. Maybe it's hilarious. Maybe it's absurd. In a group setting, it's higher. It's like 60%. So there's a 60% chance that you have a sickness of dissociation, of discomfort with transparency and deep emotion, of passing on exactly what was done to you in this culture whenever you felt scared, humiliated, helpless, overwhelmed. Like, half the laugh tapes out there, they're all about disorient, confuse, humiliate someone, put them in this total situation, and then laugh like hell at them while they go through it. On some level, it's quite sociopathic. But it is also a sociopathicness. Like, I don't treat people, veterans, people suffering from PTSD, children who are in trauma, I don't treat them that way. I can recognize it easily because I know it, and I protect them, and I fight people that add to their abuse with ignorance, with stupidity, with cruelty, and with dissociation. But this puts me at odds with a majority of a population in group dynamic, because a majority of the population is ignorant about the level of pain that we're dealing with. And here's what I mean. If you actually were there with a child having their leg ripped off, with a freight train going over their leg, and they're screaming, there is a sociopathic element in every group and in every person. That's, you'll see it with people gawking rather than helping, and you'll see it in suicide cases with people telling people to jump. There's a sociopathic element in each of us that is cruel, numb, and wants more stimulation. It's an addictive compulsion. And this
addictive compulsion and dissociation and want of more stimulation is looking for entertainment in other people's extreme agony. We all have some part of that. We're all sick with some part of that. It is a disease. It's from too much numbing within the culture as a whole. And we will participate in certain situations, particularly when we have no mental way of understanding the agony the other person's going through. When it's physical, we're pretty good with that. And anyone laughing at someone while their their leg was getting ripped off the chain who was innocent, they'd be shook, punched, shook, get out of here. We don't want this bullshit. This is sociopathic. We need people here who are able to be human and to help. But when it gets into dissociation and mental torment, that's just as bad, only it's even worse because the person with their leg being ripped off, they know they're going to get some reasonable help from even a stranger in that situation because we all understand that pain. They know they're not going to be laughed on. They may be gawked at on YouTube by, the most painful moments in history, and people want to, watch that kind of thing for some reason, just for fascination. But it's not going to be laughed at for the most part. But in a mental or emotional dissociation that leads to that agony, it's frequently attacked. It's not clear entirely why. But people who have observed it many times, it creates a level of fear about talking about some of this pain. That's not healthy because it allows the percentage of the population with a sickness, like a flu, like a virus of some kind, that has nothing to do with the character or innate nature of the human being, but is contagious. It affects others. It's spreading out because it's not being addressed and understood and recognized. We need to know what the symptoms are. We need to know to the extent that they're affecting things. So, like 80% of my entire life is organized around this disease, this dis-ease. And I'm viewed as a success because I make more money than most people. I have more freedom. I have more, quote, freedom, theoretical freedom. I don't have freedom at all. I have more theoretical freedom. I can decide where I spend my money. I can travel. I'm the authority in my business, so I can tell people, what to do. I'm articulate. I'm successful at what I do because I just pick things that will fit within the disease. For example, I started 20 books, treating them as a book, failed. Every single time, felt hopeless because I couldn't carry the thread through a book. So I redesigned the concept of book to be lots of chapters on a very general theme. I can hold that. I can go into narrow beam mode, write, edit, and finish a chapter and then forget about it. And then go to another theme when I've got 20 to 50 of those. And they have to be less than 10 pages because otherwise I can't hold the theme. Or I can't stay in that focus enough to write that. I need to move my body and do something restless after about 10 pages. So if I am succinct enough to keep a chapter within 10 pages or within an hour and a half, if I am articulate enough that I can write, edit, sort out and name the chapter and then be done with it, and then just do that 20 or so times, I now have a book. So as a result, I have at least 10 books. I can't keep track of them. And they're easy because I've adapted everything around the disease that I have no control over. This is invisible It's invisible. We don't tend to pay attention to it unless someone is completely dysfunctional. However, I also think it's worth noting that the reason I'm functional is because I believe in myself, which a lot of people who have been so shamed and attacked for having a disease, plus, having people violate and torture them, etc., and nobody do anything. A lot of these people have such a low self-esteem that they then lack the adaptive ability to say, well, there's got to be a way around this. I'm a great person, so normal book writing doesn't work, so I'm just going to make one that works. Here's the irony. Because I've had to learn succinctness, or I couldn't do it because of the disease, people love my books because they're succinct. I get that comment all, it's so easy to read, simple, straightforward, not like other books. This is a great book. And so I end up being praised for an adaptation I've made to an invisible disease, i.e. for most of my life I didn't know I had it. And for everyone else, they don't see it. They see a successful author, a successful business owner, a successful traveler, an intelligent and articulate person. And then if they get to know me, they start saying, what's the big deal with these toilets? Why is our whole meal being interrupted because Dane asked for frozen peaches, the one said he was going to get it, then he's disappeared, and Dane's off tracking that, and why did you leave your shift when you didn't get me my frozen peaches, and blah, blah, because it's ruining this track. What's more, I hate groups because I can't keep a track with groups. It's always jumping around from one person to another. It's just overwhelming. It takes me back into overwhelm. But I can hold the attention of one person and engage with one person for hours and hours and love it and feel, like there's more to go. So I'm going to pause and see what's up with Genevieve, the manager. So I just followed up with the operator and somewhat petulantly asked why I haven't heard from Genevieve. I've then figured out who in the hotel works with toilets. It's engineering. And so I've asked them to come. And here's what's happening in my body and my brain right now, is I'm beginning to get exhausted. I'm staying at high revs for too long on this narrow focus thing. But it's just burning up. It's kind of like a car trying to rev and burning up the tires. It's that kind of feeling. I have it in my back of my neck. I'm tight, I'm tired, and if I get off the track, so this is where a big possible misunderstanding will come in. If I burn out on the whole toilet thing, which, this kind of thing happens all the time, because there's no response, then I want nothing to do with it. That is not part of my track anymore. So it goes into this complete, I've got to completely kind of dissociate and start a new track. It's like starting a whole new thing, and I've lost my course. Now, this is hard work. If you can imagine you're zooming along, and you hit this barrier, but your tires are still spinning, and someone's left you in this shaking state for 15 minutes. And you say, fuck it, I've got to just get out of the car, clear off the smoke, or I'm going to just go on to something else. And there, let's see what is that. Okay, so update on the toilet. This is all disorienting, by the way, all this happening. But Genevieve's disappeared. I'm annoyed about that because she was a kind, patient woman. It's one of the reasons I had the courage to make this part of my track. She's a woman, so she's less, and she's a Filipino woman, so she's less likely to shame me for being worked up about this, which there's a probability that I might be, given the role it's playing of protecting me from all this emotion out here. It has a much bigger weight in my world than it does in anyone else's world. And so, given that, I mean, like, you would all understand me if my baby was in jeopardy and I was talking about that. Because the amount of emotional weight you would be able to relate to would make sense to you. The joke is this is about a toilet. But this has nothing to do with the toilet. That just happens to be the placeholder of the narrow beam focus that is protecting me from that amount of emotion, because although my actual child is not out in traffic and lost and taken by kidnappers and all that panic, my inner child, the frozen parts of me that are 9 months old, that are 2 years old, that are 4 years old, that are stuck in overwhelming states of trauma, are still here. I don't know when they're going to wash over me and hit, but I know that my narrow beam focus is my best way of being able to swim and not drown in that terror. So it's completely irrelevant what the focus is. The point is, it's a life raft for anyone. It's kind of like, I had a lot of emotional reaction around that island of nightmares that's in Peter Pan, where they're just stuck in that nightmare, and the ship is the only thing that has a chance of getting them out, and they so want to climb aboard that ship. But people are whacking them back and trying to sail away without them, because they're so terrified of being caught in that endless thing where every nightmare is a reality. It's that kind of dread and panic. But it's a dread and panic that almost no one sees. And even if they see it, almost no one understands. And even if they understand that that amount of emotion is attached to, for example, the toilet, and they get that, why would it be? So that's the purpose of the video, is explaining this terrain to myself and also to you, to others, because there's an incredible amount of compassion that needs to be brought into this space to anyone who's in this kind of state.